Ms. Metters? There you are.
Good morning. We'll take the discussion back to the substantial and significant impacts and how they would, let's see here, I kind of lost my train of thought, but basically how us in the Delta need to accommodate some of these things. And then we were talking about the difference. We have one project that's getting ready to come up online that's bringing concern that maybe this would be a good real-life or real-time discussion. One of them coming up is, it was brought up at the last, not this last one, but Delta Science Board, the gentleman from the USGS on Prospect Island brought up a concept that's now, I think, grabbing some more traction, and that concept was setback levees on Minor Slough to feed over into blocking off Sutter Slough at the Sacramento River, and it would also take and have some negative impacts on Steamboat Slough. In the course of that context, he talked about habitat restoration and habitat creation, and specifically tidal marsh. And this was new to me, and I think maybe to some of the people in the room, that if the created tidal marsh in the upper North Delta is created and put in there, what happens is you lose energy every time that you break a levee or what have you, you lose some of that tidal energy. He mentioned that if we were to take and create this habitat up in the north first, and then further down the line or a few years later, restore correct tidal habitat in the southern portion of the San Joaquin, there, Pittsburgh, Antioch area. In there, if that was restored and further levees were broke, it would strand the created habitat up in the North Delta, A. B, what would happen with losing that tidal energy, Steamboat and Sutter Sloughs would no longer be bidirectional. They would no longer be tidal influenced. They would be outflow only. So in the context of significant and substantial impacts, and then to the businesses and what have you, this project alone takes out 3 marinas.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm unfamiliar. This is a formal project with a governmental agency proposing
what was brought up at the time that the gentleman, Mr. Brower, is his name, I think, Bauer? I'm sorry.
Dr. Goodwin, you may know about this.
Yes, at this meeting here.
Yeah, actually, is this on? Yeah. If I recall the discussion that you're mentioning, it was a much broader discussion about principles of restoration in the Delta.
True.
And so it was my recollection the ISB weren't saying do this, do that. They were looking at the principles of how you connect various types of habitat across the Delta environment. And in retrospect, they probably shouldn't have cited any particular location. They were much more talking about the broader principles. So I don't think the ISB was saying do X or
not
do
the
Y.
ISB. This was not an ISB decision. This was the gentleman from the USGS who runs the Prospect Island and the Liberty Island projects out there. And it was his new dream project he threw out. It wasn't part of. Okay, so that taken into context, my greater point into this is if this thing takes traction, now we're talking significant and substantial impact. We're talking about taking active farmland out of production now into setback levees, but we're talking about navigation, we're talking about flows, and economic impact of removing 3 marinas in the North Delta. So again, we started talking about this discussion here and then bringing it back into how do you go about doing habitat restoration and working on supplying the reliable water supply and still trying to keep and maintain some form of the Delta in what we know it as today, as well as evolving in the future. But when you're taking it out of existence, you have significant and substantial impacts there. So the idea of rolling with it or expecting us and the greater area to always be accommodating, to what point?
Ms. Metter, it's one thing. I thought you had an illustration of an actual physical project by an agency underway or a developer proposal, but if this is generalized discussion, it's hard to do it. If what you're saying is that any project which affects any interest in the Delta must be considered significant, because the statute doesn't say that.
I didn't say, but you're defining the difference, and the discussion was positive and negative impacts or significant and substantial. Yeah. So that having been said, this is an idea that's out there, but it's one that can be brought at least into the discussion of something that has the potential of occurring. So we can create a conversation in things that are happening now and not always in a concept or a theory or an idea, but this is what's really, really happening, and these are the potential consequences, intended or otherwise, so how are we going to deal with them? Woody debris. I mean, just that alone that we talked about encroachment. We have that encroaching and it silts in and it takes up from the marinas that are there now. And they're losing business. They can't bring in. Snug Harbor alone has less than an 18-inch draft at low tide. We can't get any sailboats in there. Some of the bigger craft can't come in. But stuff like it matters. It matters when you don't dredge and you don't allow the things to happen within the delta on the water side to create economic prosperity. So these are things that I think that need to be discussed in the projects here, because we have to be able to move forward in this.
Okay.
I think this illustrates the value